Good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. I'm going to take a crack just for a few minutes. I'm not going to go too deep in it. I'm going to talk about the Federal Reserve for just a few minutes because I want you all to understand, what it is that we're up against within our own movement and outside of our movement, and just trying to get public spending on the people. So we've had Randall Wray on the show talking about the Federal Reserve. We've had Rohan Gray on the show talking about the Federal Reserve. We've had Warren Mosler on the show talking about the Federal Reserve. We've had Ellis Winningham on the show talking about the Federal Reserve. We have had Nathan Tankus on the show talking about the Federal Reserve. We have had Pavlina talk about the Federal Reserve. We have had Fidel Kaboub talk about the Federal Reserve. We've had Stephen Hale talk about the Federal Reserve. And we've had John Harvey even talk about the Federal Reserve. Folks, we have had more people come on the show. We've had Tim Canova come on with Amend the Fed message. We've had so many people come on here and talk about the Federal Reserve. It's unbelievable. I've talked about it at length. Everyone that we talk to, when we try to describe what our potential is as a movement, as a nation to do great things, we cannot get past people that have been indoctrinated in this conspiracy gibberish about the Federal Reserve. And I want to say this as someone who's not defending the actions of the Federal Reserve, but as someone who's merely trying to explain to you the way it is and why this is so important to us. So as you see someone like Justin Santapietro, who Joe Firestone just interviewed, come on, and let's say Justin wins his seat and goes to Congress. Folks like Justin Santapietro and others who are economically literate have an opportunity to go there and fight for meaningful legislation that can serve you and I. Whether you think elections are fair or not, whether you think there's corruption or not, is irrelevant on this. The point is that guys like Justin can go up there and they can fight for robust social programs. They can fight for robust infrastructure plans. They can fight for any number of things. And our movement, rather than looking at that, will revert over here to the Alex Jones world and talk about the Federal Reserve, a private banking cartel, and all these other things. Now, I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. There are very, very rich people in this world that got rich by all kinds of very, very horrific, bad ways. We are inundated with the power, influence of money brokers, and banks have way too much power in our existing society the way we've allowed it to go. And the International Monetary Fund and all the other connected entities have done horrific neoliberal things. So there's that. We'll just keep that there, all right? But what the Federal Reserve does is far more boring than people will ever allow for it to be. They want it to be a James Bond novel. I don't know why. I would think that they would want to have universal health care. I would think they'd want to have all of our bridges grade A. I would think they'd want student debt wiped out, and I would think they'd want to have free college for their kids. But they really, really, really love believing that the Federal Reserve took over the United States instead of understanding that the dollar is the government's unit of account, period. Period. It's a law. It's their unit of account. Congress created the Federal Reserve in the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. That charter that brought the Federal Reserve into being has been changed many, 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 many times. They've altered it, they've shifted it, they've amended it, they've changed it. They've done a host of things over the course of time. Why is it? Because Congress has the ability to change it at will. Anytime it wants, it could change it. So, the Federal Reserve also remits all of its profits to the Treasury, minus its operating expenses. That's one hell of a way to get rich if you're an organization, to give all your profits to the government. You got to ask yourself, why in the world such a fantastic coup d'etat it would do that? And the reason for it is that it is the nation's central bank. When Congress, imagine this, we're going to role play for just a second. Congress writes a bill, whatever that bill is. Let's say that bill is to go to war. Let's say Congress writes a bill to go to war. And we don't raise taxes, so we deficit spend on this war. Now all of a sudden this war is paid for how? How is this war paid for? We didn't raise taxes. So you pretty much can guarantee right there that taxpayer dollars didn't pay for the war. No, Congress wrote a bill. It authorized spending. And the Federal Reserve made deposits with fingers into the Treasury's account. It was dispersed, and that's the end of it. If that happens, Ralph, BS, wake up. Ralph, how about you wake up? How about you shut up and put your fingers back and listen for a minute? How about doing that? It'll work out for you, I promise. Bottom line, I'm going to hide these comments for now. Bottom line, when the U.S. government writes a bill, whether it be a $1 trillion stimulus package, or whether it be, I don't know, subsidies for the ACA, whatever, government checks don't bounce. And the government is never told no. Why is that? If it's a private bank and we're devaluing our currency, why in the world would the private bank agree to allow us to debase our currency? First of all, it's bullshit. It's not how it works. But second of all, why would that be? Why would they do such a thing? Okay? We are living in a time where disinformation is so powerful that it blocks us from ever making meaningful gains. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that as soon as we start organizing and start pushing for Medicare for all, or as soon as we start organizing and pushing for getting rid of student debt, suddenly the media comes out with something to distract us, and then the herd, and if you're one of the herd, it's kind of a shameful place to be, right? I mean, you got to feel kind of weird being part of that herd that follows the media back and forth, right? It's got to make you feel a little bit less than. And it would be with good cause, because it is a non-free thinking place to be, right? You're following the pack. It's kind of a shameful existence. But that said, you notice that every time we get a little bit of organized, they take away our rights on Facebook. They all of a sudden start mitigating our reach by going ahead and stifling us with crushing algorithms. Or Google starts shifting the way the searches go so that alternative news never makes it to the top of the list. Or suddenly it's labeled fake news. Okay? But the reality is that we are always sidelined. And the Federal Reserve conspiracies are yet again another sideline, right? This is another thing that distracts us from attacking the problems that plague us as a nation. And for me, as I watch, if somebody puts a meme up, somebody puts a post up that says, should we end the Fed or should we go ahead and, have a new deal? I guarantee you, sadly, more progressives that couldn't tell you one thing the Federal Reserve does, don't have a clue what it does. okay? Literally, don't have a clue what the Federal Reserve does. But they will line up like herds, like a bunch of sheep, clicking, "End the Fed, end the Fed, end the Fed, end the Fed." Now, if you don't know what the Federal Reserve does, yet you parrot "end the Fed," does that not also equal a shameful place to be? If you don't know what it does, you can't articulate what it does, you haven't a clue what it does, but yet you say "end the Fed," do you or do you not agree that is an abomination, a shameful place to be? I'm going to go and vote yes for shameful. Because, why? Your children need health care. Your children need education. All of us need an environment that will sustain life. All of us need these basic things. We all need education so we can survive in this world, so we can advance society and better our country and better our world. But yet this "end the Fed" thing jumps out of the woodwork. It comes up out of the fucking floorboards. It comes out of the bushes. It comes out of the sewer. It's like a closet monster. You know, you find your lost socks in there with the "end the Fed" monster. And repeatedly, people will not take the time to learn what the Fed does so that we can stop saying ridiculous things and realize that the idea of ending the Fed really doesn't give us a whole lot of anything. Say you roll it into the Treasury. What now? Are you going to say, well, we can't print more money, we'll have inflation? Are you still going to say that if we end the Fed? Are you still going to say we got to go back to gold if we end the Fed? Are you still, which of these new things will crop up to stop us from having Medicare or health care for all? Which one of these other Alex Jones-based conspiracies will jump up and bite our ankle to stop us from serving the people? Which one of our good progressives down here in the 99% will do the bidding of the 1% to keep us distracted and focus on this bullshit so we don't unite and we don't get anything? Sadly, more herd animals out there that think they're woke, talking about "end the Fed," running around, missing the point. Federal Reserve does what Congress tells it to do. If Congress says, we're writing a bill, you will make these deposits, it makes those deposits, period. Period. It doesn't say, well, I don't know, your credit rating's in the toilet, I don't think I'm going to be able to give you. No, that's not how it works. The Federal Reserve is a scorekeeper in the middle. That's it. That's it. They're a scorekeeper in the middle. Now, if you're playing baseball and you hit a home run, where does that point come from? Is it going to cause inflation? No, it comes out of thin air. Boom, there's a point on the board. How about in football? You throw a touchdown. You score an extra point. You get 7 points on the board. Where did those points come from? Where did those points come from? They came from thin air. They came from keystrokes. Where does Macy's gift cards come from? Where does Macy's bucks come from? Thin air. Where does Chuck E. Cheese bucks come from? Thin air. Where does your bank accounts, debits and credits come from? Keystrokes. One of these days, this is going to make sense, and it's going to stop you from allowing anyone to distract you. And you will say, I don't give two shits about your conspiracy stuff. I want our Congress to authorize spending for health care. I want our Congress to authorize and appropriate funds for student debt relief. I want green energy, so I want Congress to write a bill that will then issue instructions to the Fed to do its bidding. Congress tells the Fed, put this money in there, create it out of thin air, keystrokes. They don't print it. Anybody that says that, you already know where I stand on this. I get sick and tired of people erroneously saying print money. We don't just randomly print money. It's not how it's done. Congress writes a bill, they authorize a bill, they tell the Fed, hey, yo, you will keystroke this shit into the Treasury's accounts. And that's how it goes. Treasury spends out of its accounts, and that's how money comes to be. That's how it enters into the private sector. When the Treasury spends, when it issues out that money by making keystrokes and sending deposits to bank accounts, that's how new money is created. Now, banks, you see the statistic. 97% of all the money in circulation is made by banks or something like that, something ridiculous like that. And there's a reason why bank credit is so prevalent, why it's so expansive. The United States government uses banks as like a public-private, relationship. It does public purpose work even though it's making a profit. It's one of these hybrid systems. Now, can we have public banking? Sure. But I want to make sure we understand the reason why there is so much bank money and bank credit and bank debt out there is because people that say, and the Fed, stop Congress from spending on the people. So therefore the people have to go to the banks and beg for bucks. You see how the End the Fed people are destroying the country? They're killing the movement? Do you see this? The reason why 97% of the frickin' money is bank credit is because we have two choices. We either have our federal government spend into the economy, or we borrow money as private entities to keep the economy going. Now, since we're not a net exporter, I didn't even talk about exports. Because at the end of the day, we always end up with a delta there. We get their goods and services for our pieces of paper. Or our digits. Our zeros and ones. So the Federal Reserve is the nation's central bank. And going way, 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 way back before the Federal Reserve existed, there were a million forms of different kinds of money, credit, you name it. And different forms of this stuff had different levels of, whatever you want to call it, preferability, convertibility. And it was like foreign exchange throughout the United States. And they said, this is crazy. So they went ahead and they instituted the Federal Reserve to clear payments, to make sure there wasn't all this fraud, that kind of fraud. Hucksters shifting bucks around, putting their thumb on the scale, hollowing out and putting like dirt inside, whatever, all these plug pennies and plug nickels and all the other crazy stuff that used to go on back in the day. Now all of a sudden, we've got our nation's central bank that is no longer constrained to the gold standard, which kept it pegged and kept the policy space way down. We couldn't do anything on the gold standard. The gold standard had to be lifted every time we did something expansionary. Every single time we wanted to do something, either go to war, which is the negative side of this, or spend on the public purpose, we had to leave the gold standard. The gold standard is a total noose around the neck of an economy. And it puts you in great peril, as you could have bank runs and have gold runs as it was done back in the day. France was like, we don't want your paper, we want your gold. And so they started depleting our gold reserves. Well, guess what? That's stupid, right? That is stupid. And if you look back, you had spikes, wild spikes of unpredictability based on a commodity-backed currency. So today, we have the ability to do incredible things. Absolutely incredible things. But our End the Fed friends are there to ensure that your children don't have health care. They're there to ensure that you never get your student loans removed. They're there to ensure that no mass unity comes together, no mass movement comes together to push for a New Deal. Your End the Fedders are there to block progress. And that's a shame. That's what our movement's up against. I'd love to blame the oligarchs. I'd love to blame the plutocrats. Hell, I'd love to blame the neoliberals. But it's us. Because if we don't decide we want this, if we keep parroting the bullshit, we get nowhere. We can't push for what we need if all these people are running around distracting people and diminishing the efforts of activists fighting for a New Deal, fighting for green energy, fighting for student debt relief. It's not going to happen as long as these End the Fed types don't understand that we already have sovereign currency. That when our Congress decides to spend, it spends. The only thing it doesn't spend on is the 99%. And all the myths and legends allow them to not spend on the 99%, because why shake up the apple cart when the poor are willing to eat each other? If you want to see change, the End the Fed folks must die down, and the people that want a New Deal must rise up. You must mitigate the distractions by focusing on saving lives. Poverty is an absolute political decision, and it's absolutely brought on by your and my ability, although I don't feel this way, so I don't know why I'm including myself in this, to sit there and pretend like the debt matters, which is just a bunch of savings accounts. Or that the deficit matters, which is just the difference between taxes and what we spend as a nation. We allow these distractions and we all suffer. And it's downright inexcusable. The American Monetary Institute runs around yammering like private debt is the same thing as sovereign debt. They don't realize that we already have sovereign currency. The national debt should actually be called the national asset clock. Because all it is the sum total of all the untaxed dollars in existence since the dawn of the country. That's it. If you pay down the debt, you get rid of the cash and the thing, the whole economy tanks. If you reduce deficits, you reduce private sector savings, which is you and I, and you kill the economy. Again, another economically illiterate maneuver. We are our own worst enemies when we allow people to tell tales from the fire pit, to run around and control the narrative and destroy progress. You say you want a New Deal, you ain't getting it as long as you got the End the Fed crowd thinking that they can somehow or another end the Fed and do all this stuff. Folks, you have seen that we don't have hardly enough power unless we all unite. And the only way any of this stuff is going to happen is if we do unite. And I want to save lives. Ending the Fed doesn't do shite. Doesn't do squatola. People don't understand. Well, it used to be that the government could do this, but now, the private banksters. If that doesn't make your skin crawl listening to that garbage, nothing will. The private banksters have a foothold because Congress doesn't do its job. And because we, as a movement, as a people, don't demand they do their job because we're too divided. Some of us chasing Rothschilds, some of us chasing other ghosts and fairies. Grow up, Peter Pan, Count Chocula, and start fighting for a new deal. Because this end the Fed thing, it must end. End the fetish now. I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progressives. Have a good night, everyone.